Poor rancher married fat stranger for a cow. On wedding night, she locked the door. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into our story. Imagine living on the edge, struggling day by day just to keep your small farm running. That was the reality for Jack Reynolds, a poor rancher in the dry, windswept plains of the American West. Jack had lost his father years ago and had inherited a barely surviving ranch. His cattle were dwindling, his crops barely making it through the drought, and his debts piled high. But there was a glimmer of hope. Word had spread about a wealthy man who was offering a large cow in exchange for marriage to his daughter, a woman who wasn't exactly the typical vision of a bride. She was said to be large, perhaps much larger than most women Jack had known, but the deal was simple: marry her, and the cow would be his. Jack was desperate, and the thought of saving his ranch with a single cow was too good to pass up. He reluctantly agreed to the proposal, never thinking that what awaited him would change his life forever. The day of the wedding arrived, and the ceremony was modest. The townspeople watched with curiosity, whispering about the deal Jack had made. He stood there, his heart heavy, knowing that he wasn't marrying for love, but for survival. As he waited for his bride, he couldn't help but wonder what she would be like. Would she be kind? Would she resent him for only marrying her for the cow? The doors opened, and in walked his bride. She was far larger than he had imagined, towering over him, her heavy footsteps echoing in the quiet room. Her dress, though beautiful, struggled to fit her frame, and her face was hidden by the layers of fabric that covered her. Jack was taken aback by her size, but it was her eyes, filled with determination, that made him pause. There was something about her that made him realize she was not to be underestimated. She was strong, not just physically, but emotionally too. As they exchanged vows, Jack felt a strange mix of relief and regret. He wasn't sure if this was the right choice, but it was too late to turn back now. The marriage was sealed, and the cow was his. That night, Jack and his new bride retired to their chamber. He was nervous, unsure of what to expect. But when he tried to enter the room, he found the door locked. His heart skipped a beat. Why had she locked the door? Was she angry? Did she resent him for marrying her for the cow? The minutes dragged on as Jack stood outside, waiting for some sign. He knocked gently at first, then a little louder, but there was no answer. The silence was deafening. Jack's mind raced with thoughts of what might happen next. Would this marriage be more than just a transaction? Would he find something more than he expected in this woman he had married out of necessity? Little did he know, the events that followed would challenge everything he thought he knew about life, love, and the bonds that tied them together. The night stretched on in silence as Jack stood outside the locked door, his heart pounding in his chest. He had never felt so uncertain, so vulnerable. What had he gotten himself into? He was used to the hard life of a rancher, the long days under the sun, working the land, and fighting for survival. But this was different. This wasn't just about cattle and crops. This was about a woman he had married not for love, but out of necessity. He knocked on the door again, this time more forcefully, his voice tinged with frustration. "Please," he whispered, "I just want to talk." But there was no response. The minutes felt like hours as Jack paced back and forth, his mind racing with thoughts of what might be going through her head. Was she angry? Was she ashamed? Did she resent him for marrying her for the cow? He couldn't understand why she had locked the door. His stomach twisted with a mixture of confusion and guilt. He had promised himself that this was just a business transaction, that he would take the cow, settle his debts, and move on with his life. But the longer he stood there, the more he realized that he had never truly considered her feelings. He had only seen her as a means to an end, a way to save his farm. But she was a person with emotions, with hopes, and dreams of her own. And now, here they were, two strangers bound by a deal, and he had no idea how to make this work. As the night grew colder, Jack's frustration began to turn to worry. He could hear the wind howling outside, the sound of the trees rustling in the distance. But inside the cabin, it was still. The silence was oppressive. He wondered what she was doing behind that door. Was she sitting there, waiting for him to leave? Or was she waiting for him to apologize, to admit that he had made a mistake? Jack didn't know, but he knew he couldn't stand out there much longer. He had to face her, to confront whatever this was between them. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the door creaked open. Jack's heart skipped a beat as he looked at his new wife, standing before him in the dim light. She didn't say anything at first, but her eyes met his, and for a moment, there was a silence between them that felt almost like understanding. She wasn't angry. She wasn't upset. She was just waiting for him to take the next step. Jack took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice hoarse. "I didn't mean for things to be this way. I never thought about what you might feel." She didn't respond immediately, but after a long pause, she stepped aside, allowing him to enter the room. As Jack walked in, he noticed how small and modest the space was. There was a simple bed in the corner, a small wooden table, and a few belongings scattered around. Nothing extravagant, nothing to suggest wealth or comfort, just the bare essentials. But there was something in the air, something Jack couldn't quite place. It wasn't just the cold or the silence. It was something more. As he looked at her, standing there with a quiet strength, he realized that she wasn't just a woman who had been forced into this marriage. She was someone who had her own story, her own battles. And for the first time, Jack felt a flicker of something he hadn't expected: respect. She wasn't the woman he had imagined when he agreed to the marriage. She was more than that. She was strong, resilient, and perhaps, just perhaps, she had the power to change his life in ways he couldn't yet understand. Jack turned to face her, his heart suddenly feeling lighter. "I don't know what this is going to look like," he said, his voice softer now. "But I want to try. I want to try to make this work." She didn't smile, but her eyes softened, and for the first time that night, Jack felt a sense of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of his story. Maybe it was the beginning of something new. As the night wore on, Jack and his bride sat together in the quiet cabin, each of them unsure of what the future held but willing to face it together. For the first time, Jack felt like he wasn't alone. And perhaps, for the first time, his life had a chance to change, for the better. As the days passed, Jack and his new wife, Mary, began to settle into an uneasy routine. The initial awkwardness of their marriage slowly gave way to a deeper understanding. Jack worked the land during the day, tending to the animals and repairing the fences that had been left to rot for far too long. Mary, on the other hand, took charge of the house. Her skills were impressive. She cooked, cleaned, and even started making small improvements to the modest cabin they now shared. Jack had never expected to find such resourcefulness in his wife. He had assumed that she was simply a means to an end, a way to secure his survival. But as the days turned into weeks, he began to see her in a different light. Mary was strong, capable, and had a quiet dignity about her that Jack couldn't ignore. He started to notice the small things: how she hummed softly while she worked, how she always made sure there was enough food for him at the end of the day, and how, despite the rough circumstances, she never complained. Jack, however, was still unsure about the nature of their relationship. He had married her for the cow, after all, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was only here because of necessity. But as the weeks went by, he started to feel something more, something he couldn't quite name. It wasn't love, at least not yet, but it was something close. One evening, after a long day's work, Jack returned to the cabin to find Mary sitting by the fire, her silhouette framed by the warm glow. She was reading a small book, her face illuminated by the flickering light. He watched her for a moment, noticing the way her eyes moved over the pages, the way her hands held the book with such care. He had never seen her like this before, so calm, so serene. For the first time since their marriage, Jack felt a strange sense of peace. He had spent so many years alone, thinking that solitude was the only way to find happiness. But now, sitting in the quiet warmth of the cabin, he realized that he had never truly known what it meant to share a life with someone. As the fire crackled, Jack finally spoke. "Mary," he said softly, his voice uncertain. I don't know what to say." She looked up from her book, her eyes meeting his. There was no judgment in her gaze, no expectation, just an understanding, as if she had been waiting for him to say something all along. "You don't have to say anything," she replied, her voice calm and steady. "We don't need to rush into anything." Jack sat down beside her, his heart racing. He had been so afraid of what would happen if he allowed himself to care about her. But now, in the quiet of the cabin, he realized that perhaps he had been wrong all along. Perhaps love wasn't something that happened overnight. Maybe it was something that grew, slowly and steadily, over time. "I don't deserve you," Jack said, his voice thick with emotion. Mary smiled gently, reaching out to place a hand on his. "You deserve more than you think," she replied. "You've been through a lot, Jack, and you're not alone anymore." For the first time in a long time, Jack felt like he might just have a chance at happiness. It wasn't the life he had imagined when he first agreed to marry Mary, but it was something more. It was a life built on hard work, on mutual respect, and on the quiet moments that made all the difference. Over the next few months, their bond grew stronger. Jack learned to rely on Mary in ways he had never thought possible. She had a way of making the impossible seem manageable, and her strength became a source of inspiration for him. Together, they worked to rebuild the ranch, slowly but surely, turning it into something that could support them both. It wasn't easy, and there were times when Jack wanted to give up, but Mary was always there, steady and unwavering. She was his rock. But despite the progress they made, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. He had married her for the cow, after all, and the guilt of that decision still gnawed at him. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the plains, Jack turned to Mary, his heart heavy. "Mary," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, "I need to tell you something." She looked at him, her expression soft and patient. "What is it, Jack?" I never married you for love," he confessed, the words spilling out before he could stop them. "I married you because I needed the cow, because my ranch was dying and I didn't know what else to do." "I'm sorry." Mary sat still for a moment, her eyes studying him. For a second, Jack thought he saw a flicker of disappointment, but then she smiled, a small, knowing smile. "I know," she said quietly. "I knew from the beginning." Jack's heart sank. "You knew?" he asked, his voice full of disbelief. "How could you?" "Because," she said softly, "I didn't marry you for love either. I married you because I needed something too. I needed a life. I needed a chance to build something of my own. And I thought this could be the beginning." Jack stared at her, speechless. In that moment, everything shifted. He realized that they weren't so different after all. They had both been driven by necessity, by a need to survive. But somewhere along the way, they had found each other. And perhaps, just perhaps, that was enough. As the months went by, Jack and Mary continued to build their life together, piece by piece. The ranch was slowly coming back to life, but there were still many challenges ahead. Jack had never realized how much he had depended on his wife until now. She had become an integral part of his world, not just because of the cow that saved them, but because of the unwavering support she had given him. They were learning to lean on each other in ways that neither had expected. However, the weight of their past decisions still loomed over Jack. He had married Mary for the cow, and even though they had grown close, that guilt never fully went away. Every time he looked at her, he saw not just his wife, but the reminder of the reason they were together. It gnawed at him, even as they shared quiet evenings by the fire, their laughter filling the cabin. One afternoon, as Jack worked on mending the fence, he noticed a group of riders approaching from the distance. His heart skipped a beat. The last thing he wanted was trouble, especially now when things were finally starting to settle down. The riders drew closer, and Jack could make out their faces. It was a group of men from the neighboring ranch, led by none other than the man who had originally offered the cow in exchange for marriage, John Wesley. Jack's pulse quickened. What could this be about? As they stopped in front of the cabin, John Wesley dismounted and approached Jack, a serious expression on his face. "Jack," he said, his voice low and steady. "I've come to talk about the cow." Jack's stomach tightened. He hadn't thought about the cow in weeks, but now the memory of that deal felt like it was coming back to haunt him. "What about it?" Jack asked cautiously. John looked over his shoulder, then back at Jack. "It's not just about the cow anymore," he said. "It's about the land. The cow was part of a deal that goes beyond what you know. The property you're working on? It's mine." Jack felt the blood drain from his face. He had worked so hard to rebuild the ranch, and now this man was claiming it as his own? "What are you talking about?" Jack demanded. "I've been working this land. It's mine now. You gave me the cow, and we made a deal. That's all there is to it." John smirked. "Oh, there's much more to it than that. You see, the cow wasn't the only thing you Agreed to. You've been working on my land for months without even realizing it. That cow, that marriage, it was all part of a larger arrangement. And now, I'm here to collect. Jack took a step back, his mind racing. This wasn't what he had signed up for. He thought he was saving his ranch, his life. But now, it seemed like the deal was more complicated than he had ever imagined. What do you want from me? Jack asked, his voice steady but filled with anger. You've had your cow. You've had your land. What more is there? John took a long pause before answering. You've got a choice, Jack. You can keep the land, but you'll have to pay for it. Far more than you can afford. Or you can give it up and leave, just like you should have done when I offered you the cow in the first place. But remember this. If you try to fight me, you won't just lose the ranch. You'll lose everything. Jack clenched his fists. He had worked too hard to let this man take everything from him. But he also knew that fighting John Wesley would only make things worse. He needed to think, and he needed to think fast. As John and his men turned to leave, Jack's mind raced with thoughts of what to do next. He couldn't let this man win. He had built this life with Mary, and he wasn't about to give it up so easily. But what could he do? He needed help, and he knew just where to turn. That night, as Jack sat by the fire, his thoughts consumed by the situation, Mary walked over and sat beside him. Jack, what's wrong? She asked softly. He looked at her, his heart heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. It's about the land, Mary, he said, his voice full of frustration. John Wesley is claiming it. He says I've been working on his land all this time, and now he wants it back. Mary's expression softened as she took his hand. We'll figure this out, Jack. We've been through worse, and we've made it through. You're not alone in this. Jack looked at her, a sense of gratitude flooding his chest. She was right. They had made it through so much already, and this wasn't the end. They would fight for what was theirs, together. And no matter what happened, Jack knew one thing for sure. He wouldn't lose Mary, and he wouldn't lose the life they had built. The next morning, Jack gathered his courage and set out to confront John Wesley. He wasn't sure how this would end, but one thing was clear. He wasn't going to back down without a fight. The morning after Jack's conversation with Mary, he woke up early, his mind still heavy with the weight of John Wesley's threat. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, casting a soft orange glow over the plains. Jack stood at the edge of the porch, staring out at the land he had worked so hard to rebuild. His thoughts were tangled with anger, fear, and determination. He knew what he had to do. He couldn't let Wesley take what was rightfully his. But how could he fight a man with so much power? The situation felt hopeless, but Jack wasn't one to give up easily. His mind raced as he remembered the lessons his father had taught him about standing up for what was his, about fighting even when the odds seemed insurmountable. Mary came out onto the porch, bringing him back to reality. She was holding a cup of coffee, her face soft with concern. Jack, you look like you haven't slept, she said gently, handing him the cup. Jack took it gratefully, his fingers brushing against hers for a brief moment. I haven't, he replied, his voice thick with frustration. Wesley came by yesterday. He's claiming the land as his. Says I've been working on it without knowing, and now he wants it back. Mary's expression hardened. That man is a snake, she muttered, her eyes narrowing. We can't let him just take everything from us, Jack. Jack looked at her, feeling a surge of gratitude for her unwavering support. I don't know what to do, Mary, he admitted. I don't have the money to buy him out, and if I fight him in court, it could take years. Years we don't have. Mary set her coffee down on the railing and turned to face him fully. We're not going to fight him in court, Jack. We're going to do this our way. Jack raised an eyebrow. Our way? What do you mean? Mary smiled, her eyes shining with a quiet confidence. We're going to stand our ground. We'll gather the people who know the truth about what's happened here, the people who have seen how hard we've worked. We'll make sure Wesley can't push us around. Jack felt a glimmer of hope. He hadn't thought about calling on the community for help. He had been so focused on the problem that he hadn't considered the strength in numbers. You're right, he said, his voice more confident now. We have to fight for what's ours. That afternoon, Jack and Mary began to make calls, reaching out to neighbors, friends, and anyone who knew the story of their land. They spoke to old ranchers who had witnessed the early days of Jack's struggles and had seen the effort he had put into rebuilding the ranch. They spoke to farmers who had traded goods with them and knew the value of the land. Word spread quickly, and by the end of the day, Jack had gathered a small group of people who were willing to stand with him. The following morning, Jack and Mary set out to meet Wesley. They had gathered enough support to confront him, and they were ready to make it clear that they would not back down. As they rode toward Wesley's ranch, Jack felt the weight of the moment settle over him. This wasn't just about land. This was about dignity, about showing that no one, no matter how wealthy or powerful, could take advantage of them. They reached the edge of Wesley's property, where he stood waiting, a smug look on his face. Behind him were a few of his men, looking as if they were ready for a fight. Jack dismounted and stood tall, his chest swelling with determination. "I've gathered the people who know the truth, Wesley," he said firmly. "You can't just take what doesn't belong to you. This land belongs to me, and I'm not going to let you walk all over us." Wesley scoffed. "You're just a poor rancher, Jack. You've got nothing to stand on." But Jack's voice was steady as he spoke, not just for himself, but for everyone who had come together to help him. "I've got something better than money, Wesley. I've got the truth. And I've got the people who will stand with me to make sure you can't push us around." As Jack spoke, the neighbors and friends he had gathered began to emerge from behind the trees, stepping forward one by one. They were there to show their support, to make it clear that Jack wasn't alone. The crowd grew larger as more people arrived, all willing to stand up against Wesley's tyranny. Wesley's confident smirk began to fade as he looked around at the growing number of people who were backing Jack. He took a step back, realizing that he had underestimated the power of community. "This isn't over," Wesley said, his voice dripping with venom. "You'll regret this." But Jack stood his ground, his voice unwavering. "Maybe, but I'll never regret standing up for what's right." The confrontation ended with Wesley storming off, but Jack knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a long fight. But with Mary by his side and the support of the people who believed in him, Jack felt ready for whatever came next. As they rode back to their ranch, Jack looked over at Mary, a smile tugging at his lips. "We've got a lot of work ahead of us," he said, "but we'll get through this." Mary smiled back, her eyes filled with pride. "Together, we can do anything." Jack knew she was right. No matter what Wesley tried next, Jack and Mary had the strength of their land, their love, and their community to back them up. The weeks that followed were filled with tension and uncertainty, but also a growing sense of purpose. Jack and Mary continued to work side by side, repairing the ranch and preparing for whatever Wesley would throw their way next. The community had rallied behind them, offering help where they could, whether it was with the crops or the cattle. Jack had never felt more connected to the people around him. Every day, he found himself more grateful for the support that surrounded him. But even as the ranch began to flourish once more, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. Wesley hadn't given up. Jack knew the man wouldn't walk away quietly, and the looming threat weighed on him like a storm cloud. One evening, as the sun set behind the distant hills, casting an orange glow over the landscape, Jack sat down with Mary on the porch. The quiet of the evening was a welcome relief after the exhausting work of the day. But even as they sat in silence, Jack could sense her unease. "What's wrong, Mary?" he asked softly. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with concern. "Jack, I've been thinking," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "Wesley isn't going to let this go. He'll keep coming after us, and we need to be ready." Jack nodded. He had known this was coming, but hearing it from Mary made it all the more real. "I know," he said, his voice heavy with frustration. "I thought we had made it clear that we wouldn't back down. But he's not the kind of man to accept defeat easily." Mary stood up and walked over to where Jack was sitting. She placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch warm and reassuring. "Then we need to fight back," she said firmly. "Not just with our hands, but with our heads. We need to outsmart him, Jack. We can't let him control us." Jack looked at her, seeing the strength in her eyes. He had always admired her resilience, her ability to see things clearly even when the world seemed chaotic. "You're right," he said, standing up and meeting her gaze. "We can't let him win. But how do we outsmart someone like him?" Mary smiled, a glimmer of determination in her expression. "We've got the community on our side," she said. "And we've got the land. We'll make sure everyone knows the truth about what's really going on. And when Wesley tries to move in on us again, we'll be ready to stop him." Jack felt a spark of hope ignite within him. For the first time in weeks, he felt like they had a chance. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were fighting back. Together, they began to make plans. They spoke to the neighbors, making sure they all knew about Wesley's claims. They gathered evidence, records, and witnesses who could speak to the true ownership of the land. Slowly but surely, Jack began to see a path forward. He wasn't just going to stand by and let Wesley take everything from him. He was going to fight, and he was going to win. A few days later, Jack and Mary made their way to the local courthouse, a small, weathered building that stood in the center of the town. It was a hot day, and the air was thick with tension. As they stepped inside, they were met by the town's sheriff, a man who had been an ally from the start. "Jack, Mary," he greeted them with a nod. "We're ready. The evidence is in, and we've got the support of the community. Wesley won't be able to get away with this." Jack felt a surge of gratitude. The sheriff had been instrumental in getting the town behind them. Without his support, they wouldn't have had a chance. "Thank you," Jack said, his voice filled with gratitude. "We couldn't have done this without you." The sheriff smiled. "It's my job to protect the people, Jack. You've earned this." As they prepared for the hearing, Jack and Mary stood together, side by side, ready to face whatever came next. They knew it wasn't going to be easy. They knew Wesley would fight them every step of the way. But they also knew one thing for sure. They weren't going to give up. As the doors to the courtroom opened, they stepped inside, ready to take on the man who had threatened their way of life. The battle wasn't over yet, but Jack felt a renewed sense of strength. He had his wife by his side, the support of the community, and the courage to stand up for what was right. Together, they were unstoppable. The courtroom was silent as the gavel came down, signaling the start of the hearing. Jack and Mary sat together in the front row, surrounded by their allies from the community, their hearts pounding with anticipation. This was the moment they had been preparing for, the moment they would finally stand up to John Wesley and claim what was rightfully theirs. The judge, a stern man with a weathered face, glanced over at Wesley, who was seated at the other side of the room, his smug expression still intact. Jack could feel the tension in the air. Wesley's men sat behind him, their eyes scanning the room, their hands resting on their holstered weapons. But Jack didn't flinch. He had come this far, and he wasn't about to back down now. The judge cleared his throat and called the court to order. "We are here today to resolve the dispute over the land claimed by Mr. Jack Reynolds and the defendant, Mr. John Wesley," he announced. "Mr. Wesley, you may present your case." Wesley stood up, straightening his jacket, and began speaking in a calm, measured voice. "Your Honor," he said, his tone dripping with confidence. "This land, and the cow that Mr. Reynolds received, were part of an agreement that was never fully honored. The property in question is mine by right, and Mr. Reynolds has no claim to it. I have the papers to prove it." He waved a stack of documents in the air, his eyes meeting the judge's with a look of triumph. Jack felt his pulse quicken, but he knew better than to react. He had anticipated this. Wesley would rely on paperwork, on technicalities, but Jack had something far more powerful. He had the truth. The judge nodded, motioning for Wesley to sit down. "Thank you, Mr. Wesley. Mr. Reynolds, it's your turn." Jack stood, his legs slightly shaky, but his voice was strong as he addressed the court. "Your Honor, I never asked for this fight. I never wanted to be in this position. All I wanted was to save my ranch. I married Mary, not out of choice, but out of necessity. The cow was a means to an end." He paused, his gaze moving to Mary, who sat beside him, her eyes full of unwavering support. "But that doesn't mean I haven't worked for everything I have. I've put in the blood, sweat, and tears to make this land thrive again. I've earned it, and I've had the support of this community every step of the way." Jack motioned to the people who had come to support him, many of whom had testified earlier. They were his friends, his neighbors, the people who had watched him struggle and helped him rebuild. "Wesley may have papers, but we have the truth," Jack continued. "We've worked this land together. We fought for it, and we will not let anyone, not even someone like Wesley, take it from us." The room was quiet for a moment, the weight of Jack's words settling over everyone. Even Wesley's men seemed to shift uncomfortably in their seats. The judge looked at both sides carefully before speaking. "I see that this is not a simple matter of paperwork. This is a matter of ownership, of what is truly earned." He paused, taking a moment to glance over the documents that had been presented, as well as the testimonies from Jack and his neighbors. "I believe it is clear that Mr. Reynolds has established a rightful claim to this land through his labor and the support of this community." Jack could hardly believe what he was hearing. The judge continued, While Mr. Wesley may have legal documents to back his claim, it is clear that Mr. Reynolds has worked this land and has earned it through years of hard work and sacrifice. The court will recognize his ownership of the land. Wesley's face went pale, his confidence shattering in an instant. He stood up, his fists clenched, but the judge raised his hand to silence him. The ruling is final, the judge declared. Mr. Reynolds will retain ownership of the land. The gavel came down once again, and the courtroom erupted into a mixture of cheers and murmurs. Jack couldn't believe it. They had won. As he looked at Mary, tears filled his eyes. She stood beside him, her hand gently resting on his arm. She didn't say anything, but the look in her eyes said it all. They had done it. Together, they had fought for their home, and together, they had won. Outside the courthouse, the sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the land. Jack stood there, taking it all in, feeling the weight of the past few weeks lift off his shoulders. They had come through the storm, and now, for the first time in a long while, he felt like they were truly free. He turned to Mary, his heart full. "We did it," he whispered. Mary smiled, her eyes sparkling with pride. "We did it, Jack," she said softly. "And now, we can build the life we've always dreamed of." Jack looked out at the ranch, knowing that this was just the beginning. They had fought for it, and they would continue to fight for it. Together, they had found something more than land or cattle. They had found a future, one they would build with their own hands, side by side. The following weeks felt like a new beginning. The weight of the court ruling had finally lifted, but Jack and Mary knew the real work was just starting. The ranch was theirs, and they would continue to work day and night to build something lasting. But even as they settled into their newfound peace, they couldn't ignore the sense of unease that lingered in the air. Wesley hadn't taken the loss well. He had been quiet since the court decision, but Jack could feel the tension building. He knew that men like Wesley didn't give up easily. Mary, ever the realist, had noticed the same thing. "Jack," she said one evening as they sat by the fire, "we've won this battle, but I don't think Wesley will let us be. He's the kind of man who likes to make others suffer." Jack nodded, his jaw tight with the memory of Wesley's cold threats. "I know, but we've already shown him that we're not going to back down. We've got the land, the ranch, and the support of the people. He can't take that away from us." Mary reached out, taking his hand in hers, her touch grounding him. "I know we can't live in fear of him forever, but we need to be ready. It's not just about fighting for the land anymore. It's about protecting what we've built together." Jack looked at her, seeing the same strength and resolve he had come to rely on. She was right. They had fought for their home, but now it was time to secure it. They couldn't afford to be complacent. The next few days were spent preparing. Jack reinforced the ranch's fences, making sure the gates were sturdy and the barns were secure. He and Mary worked together to stock up on supplies, knowing that if trouble came, they would need to be ready. The neighbors, too, rallied around them, offering whatever help they could. It was clear that the community had their backs. Jack had always known that people could be counted on when times got tough. One afternoon, as Jack was finishing up a fence near the east pasture, he spotted a rider in the distance. At first, he thought it was just another neighbor coming to check in, but as the figure drew closer, he saw the unmistakable silhouette of Wesley. Jack's stomach tightened. This was it, the confrontation he had been waiting for. He set down his tools and walked toward the gate, where Wesley came to a halt. The man dismounted slowly, his eyes narrowing as they met Jack's. "Jack," he said, his voice cold, "I've got a proposition for you." Jack's hand instinctively moved to the handle of the rifle he kept nearby, but he didn't pull it out. Instead, he stood tall, refusing to show any sign of fear. "I'm listening," he replied, his voice firm. Wesley smirked, clearly enjoying the power he thought he still held. "I'm offering you a chance to make this right," he said. "Sell me the land, and I'll let you keep the cow. You can go back to your little life, and I'll take what's rightfully mine." Jack stared at him, his mind racing. This was no simple offer. Wesley wasn't just asking for the land. He was trying to buy Jack's peace, his dignity. But Jack wasn't about to sell either. "This land is mine, Wesley," Jack said, his voice low but steady. "And I'm not selling. Not now, not ever." Wesley's smirk faltered, his eyes flashing with anger. "You think this is over, don't you?" he spat. "You think because you've got the law on your side that I'll just walk away? You're wrong. This isn't over." Jack took a step forward, his fists clenched. "It is over," he said, his voice rising. You lost. And I'm not afraid of you anymore. Wesley's eyes narrowed as he sized Jack up, but he didn't make a move. Instead, he turned on his heel and mounted his horse. You'll regret this, he said, his voice full of venom. I'll make sure of it. As Wesley rode off, Jack stood there, his heart still pounding. He knew this wouldn't be the last time he saw Wesley. But for the first time, he felt ready. Mary joined him at the gate, her eyes filled with concern but also pride. Are you okay? She asked softly. Jack nodded, his expression hardening. I'm fine. It's time we stopped running from him, Mary. It's time we took control. Mary smiled, her hand finding his. I'm with you, Jack. Whatever comes next, we face it together. They walked back toward the house, the weight of their resolve solidifying with each step. Jack knew the fight wasn't over, but for the first time, he didn't feel alone. They had faced down the storm once, and they would do it again. Together, they would protect what they had built. The ranch, their home, and the future they had worked so hard to create. And Wesley would never take that away from them. Days turned into weeks, and the ranch began to feel more like a home than it ever had before. Jack and Mary, together with their neighbors, worked tirelessly to build something lasting. The land that had once been a symbol of hardship now flourished under their care. Crops grew taller, cattle roamed freely, and the once cracked fences now stood sturdy and strong. Jack had learned that success wasn't just about the land, the cows, or the crops. It was about the people you worked alongside, the community you built, and the love you shared with those closest to you. As the seasons changed, Jack and Mary's relationship deepened. The bond they had formed through hardship was unbreakable, and with each passing day, Jack found himself more grateful for the woman by his side. Mary, too, had grown into her role as both a partner and a protector of their land. She had shown him that strength wasn't always loud and imposing. Sometimes, it was quiet, steady, and unwavering. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the ranch, Jack stood on the porch with Mary. The golden light bathed the land in warmth, and for the first time in a long while, Jack felt a deep sense of peace. We've come a long way, haven't we? He said, his voice filled with wonder. Mary smiled and placed her hand on his. We have, she agreed. But it's not just about the land or the work. It's about what we've built together. Jack looked out over the fields, his heart swelling with pride. I couldn't have done it without you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You've taught me so much. I never would have made it without you by my side. Mary's gaze softened, and she gave his hand a gentle squeeze. You've done more than you realize, Jack. You've fought for this land, for us, and for the people who believe in you. And you've shown me what it means to never give up, no matter how tough things get. They stood there for a long moment, watching as the stars began to twinkle in the clear night sky. The ranch, the community, and their future all seemed so clear now. They had weathered the storms and come out stronger on the other side. Their journey wasn't over. There would always be more work to do, more challenges to face. But for the first time, they both felt confident that they could handle whatever came next. Weeks passed, and life on the ranch continued to thrive. Jack had settled into the rhythm of his new life, no longer a man defined by the struggles of the past, but by the strength he had built alongside Mary. Together, they had turned the ranch into something to be proud of. Their love had grown, too, in ways neither of them had ever expected. But the past wasn't entirely behind them. Wesley had been silent since their confrontation, but Jack couldn't shake the feeling that he would eventually try something else. He kept an eye on the horizon, always alert, but he knew deep down that they were prepared for whatever came their way. One afternoon, as Jack was tending to the horses, a familiar figure appeared on the horizon. His heart skipped a beat. It was Wesley. But this time, Jack didn't feel the rush of fear he had once felt. This time, he felt ready. Wesley rode up to the gate, his face grim. Jack, he said, dismounting slowly, I've come to offer a truce. Jack didn't move at first, his eyes narrowing in suspicion. A truce? He repeated, incredulity in his voice. What do you mean by that? Wesley looked at him, his posture rigid. I've lost. I won't deny it, he said, his voice low. But I'm willing to settle this once and for all. I'll stop fighting you if you agree to a fair deal. Jack felt a flicker of hesitation. He had never expected Wesley to concede. The man was known for his stubbornness and pride. What's the deal? Jack asked cautiously. Wesley took a deep breath, as though gathering his thoughts. I'll leave you to your ranch. No more threats, no more legal battles. But I want something in return. I want a share of the profits from the land you've worked so hard to build. Jack didn't speak for a long moment. He had worked so hard for this, and now Wesley was asking for a share of it. It felt wrong. But then, Jack remembered what Mary had said all those weeks ago. They didn't need to fight with their fists. They needed to fight with their heads. You'll get nothing from me, Jack said firmly. This land is mine. I've earned it, and I'm not going to let you take it from me, no matter how you try to spin it. Wesley stared at him, a look of disbelief on his face. You really think you can keep this? He asked. Yes, Jack replied. I do. I've already won. Wesley stood there for a moment, his eyes burning with anger, but Jack didn't flinch. Then we're done here, Wesley muttered, mounting his horse. As Wesley rode off into the distance, Jack turned back to Mary, who had been watching the confrontation from the porch. She walked over to him, her hand resting gently on his arm. You did good, Jack, she said, her voice soft but full of pride. Jack nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. We did good, Mary, he said. Together. They stood there for a moment, side by side, watching as the sun dipped below the mountains, knowing that the future was theirs to build. They had fought for it, and they had won. Their journey had been long, but it had led them to this moment, a moment of peace, of victory, and of love. Together, they were unstoppable,